Well, good evening, everybody. As you can see, my talk tonight's on the wildlife of the Masai Mara in Kenya. And more specifically, I'm going to talk about the birds and the mammals of this major wildlife area, and show you some photos that I took on the trip I made there in March 2018. So I imagine most of you have heard of the Masai Mara. Some of you may have been there. You probably know that it's located in Kenya. And if you look at the small map in the top left-hand corner, which shows most of East Africa, or a large chunk of it, you can see the black dot on the border of the pinky orange Kenya and the green Tanzania. That is the Masai Mara. So it looks quite small on that map. Its actual area is more or less 1,500 square kilometers. If you're like me, that won't mean much to you. So to try and make it a bit more tangible, it's nearly the size of the county of Surrey, which is about 1,650 square kilometers. So looking at the bigger map here, that diagonal running across the image is the border between Kenya and Tanzania. And the green area is the Masai Mara National Reserve. You see part of it is dark green and the other part light green. The dark green part is called the Mara Triangle. I won't explain why they're different colors. They're all part of the Masai Mara National Reserve. The photos I'm going to show you were all taken on a trip, as I said, in March 2018, where I stayed more or less in the middle of this area, just across from the Mara, the darker green Mara Triangle. So quite a central location. There's various camps, and some of those little icons you can see are representing a camp of one sort or another in the national park. Now, I think most people associate the Masai Mara with the annual migration that takes place there. Huge numbers of wildebeest and other animals migrate each year from Masai Mara across into the Serengeti on the Tanzania side and then back again. Over 1 million wildebeest, about 500,000 Thompson's gazelles, and about 200,000 zebra migrate that long distance, well, fairly long distance. And I think the other thing most people associate with the Masai Mara with is the large numbers of lions and leopards and cheetahs that are, and elephants that are found there. But it's also important for birds, and I'm going to start off by looking at birds. I didn't know until recently how many species of birds have been seen in the Masai Mara. You might be surprised, like me, to find out that it's over 550 species, 566 at the last count that I'm aware of. So a huge number of birds, really, considering there's no marine birds. It's a landlocked area. And I suppose a major reason for that is the fact that you do have different habitats. You've got the grassland area where we see most of the game and the cats and so on. But also some woodland areas, marshland and aquatic areas, and so on. So that's why we get such a variety, and of course the huge size of the park. I spent most of my time in the open plains, the grassland plains. So most of the photos that I show you birds will be species that are found in that habitat. So let's start off with bustards. Here in Europe, or not necessarily in the UK, but in Europe as a whole, we have two species, the great bustard and the little bustard. The Masai Mara has 3 species. And you see these, occasionally see the males strutting their stuff like this one. So this is the black-bellied bustard. There is also a white-bellied bustard, this one. And the Cory bustard, which is the biggest of the 3. And this is the largest flying bird in the world, I believe. And they can weigh up to 19 kilos. Perhaps because of their weight, they don't seem to be very keen on flying. They would rather walk away or perhaps run away than take off. There are various species of brood parasites to be found in the Masai Mara. So these are birds that lay their eggs in the nest of another species. Of course, we all know about cuckoos. Our cuckoo does that. Cuckoos are like a big cousin of the cuckoos. And I'll talk about the wider last. So there are different species of cuckoo. This is the black cuckoo. And this one is the white-browed cuckoo. There's also a few cuckoos. This is the Diederik cuckoo, a bit smaller, I think, than the European cuckoo. This one parasitizes village weaver birds, which we'll look at later on. This is the great spotted cuckoo, so a large cuckoo. I'll just digress for a moment to say that I know that this species has got quite a wide range because I saw one in the Gambia last year. I just wanted to mention I was at one of the main birding places in the Gambia, a place called Tendaba, which some of you may be familiar with. And I was having lunch in this large restaurant area with no walls. And just outside the restaurant was a single tree. And an Englishwoman bird watcher on the table next to me suddenly shouted, "Great spotted cuckoo!" And there it was in the tree. The reason why that's significant, it was the first record for that site that there had been. So that's what I call convenient bird viewing. I didn't even have to put my spoon down whilst having my soup to see that bird. Not armchair viewing, but dining chair viewing. Anyway, forgive me that digression. This is Klaas's cuckoo. And this is a pin-tailed wider. So it doesn't look anything like a cuckoo, isn't related to cuckoos, but it's another bird that is a brood parasite. And this species parasitizes waxbills of one sort or another. This is a breeding male, or the plumage is breeding plumage, and you can see it's got a long black tail, and its courtship behavior involves flying up into the air, remember it's in the grasslands, and then kind of parachuting back down again. That's how it impresses the females around. Let's have a look at some birds that I've classified as game birds. This is the cocky francolin, not C-O-C-K-Y, but C-O-Q-U-I. I don't know how it gets that name, but anyway. This one is the helmeted guinea fowl, a bigger one, a bigger bird. And it's a bird that's eaten quite widely in Africa, very tasty bird. So you can get it in restaurants in some locations. And this is the red-necked spur fowl. So they're all quite common species in the grasslands. On to herons. This is the black-headed heron, and it frequents wetlands some of the time, but it's also happy in grasslands where instead of consuming fish, it consumes reptiles, amongst other things. This one's got something in its bill, but I can't quite see what it is. But it's a iconic species of the grasslands. And this is the striated heron, which is, as you can see, more of a wetland species. Quite a shy bird, so it tends to skulk around in the vegetation along the edge of ponds and rivers and so on. This is a kingfisher, so we would immediately perhaps tend to associate this with wetlands, but this is the woodland kingfisher, and as its name suggests, it's more of a woodland bird and will feed on invertebrates and lizards and so on. This is the southern ground hornbill. Now, I've seen hornbills before in different countries of Africa, and they've always been on the ground. As the name suggests, they are ground-dwelling birds, but on this occasion I encountered a group of them, and they were flying around a bit, and as you can see, having a bit of a confrontation. This species, likes to move by walking rather than flying, and they can walk in search of prey for as much as 30 kilometers in a day, apparently. And they feed on young birds, invertebrates, lizards, snakes, a varied diet. This is a cisticola. There are several species of cisticola in the Masai Mara. I think this is the commoner one, the pectoral patch cisticola, although it doesn't have a pectoral patch, this one. I may be incorrect there, and somebody can correct me later if I am. But I just wanted to say the cisticola, the pectoral patch cisticola, is one of the commonest birds in the grassland area, and you get several breeding pairs per square kilometre. This is another of the commonest species, the wrongly named rufous-naped lark. It hasn't got a rufous nape, as you can see, but it has got a rufous patch on the wing. So it's a bit like a skylark, basically. I don't know if you can tell, but it's actually raining. See the odd drop, a little blurred drop of rain here and there on the photo. So my caption for this photo is "Singing in the Rain." This bird does have an appropriate name. It's the yellow-throated. No, hang on. I knew I'd forget a name sooner or later. The yellow-throated. I've got a blank there. It's the second part of the name is to do with the extended claws on the feet. So we'll come back to that later. And the biggest bird in the world is of course, the ostrich, and they tend to move around in small groups. So the black and white ones are the males, and the females are and juveniles are grey. This is a bird that you would expect to see in a wetland area, but this one is in the grasslands area and in a tree, as you can see. My guide said he hadn't seen one in the grasslands before, and I guess what happened is it was going from A to B, and it left it rather late because this is around dusk, and decided to stop off in this tree, and as the night was falling, and resume its journey the next day. I don't know, that's just a guess. Anyways, the great white pelican. There are lots of different raptor species in the Masai Mara. Almost 60 have been recorded there. I think the biggest eagle is this one, the martial eagle, a very powerful predator that feeds on some of those large game birds I mentioned, such as the guinea fowl, but also takes sizable mammals like baboons or some of the antelopes, gazelles, for example. This is the bateleur eagle. I didn't know until I was doing a bit of background reading for this presentation how it gets its name. I didn't know what bateleur was. It sounds a bit French, but I never thought, what does it mean in French? And it means acrobat. So why call it the acrobat eagle? Well, it has a rather acrobatic courtship display, aerial courtship display, a bit like we see in lapwings in this country, swooping around in the sky. Very impressive. This is a medium-sized eagle, the African hawk eagle. Looks a little bit like the martial eagle, but with certain differences apart from size. This is another misnomer. It's predominantly brown, as you can see. So what do we call it? The black kite. That's just the way it is sometimes with bird names, isn't it? In the Mara and other parts of Africa, you get snake eagles, and this is the brown snake eagle. As the name suggests, they'll feed on snakes or perhaps lizards as well. And this one is the black-chested snake eagle. Again, it looks a little bit like a martial eagle, but much smaller and doesn't have those black flecks on the underparts. Some of you will recognize this as a black-winged or black-shouldered kite, since we get it in Europe as well, Southern Europe. A dainty bird with that very striking red eye. And in the Mara, you get a couple of species of kestrel. This is the grey kestrel, which will feed on things like grasshoppers predominantly. And also, you also get the common kestrel. This is the same species that we have. What I noticed that's different about kestrels in Kenya is that, or in the Masai Mara, is you get quite a lot sometimes in just one tree. So you can see there's 2 males in this tree, but you might see 10 kestrels all in the same tree. And I guess that's because there's so few trees in parts of the grassland plains that they just have to share the limited perching areas available. There's nothing else to perch on. There's no posts in the ground that humans have put in or anything like that. And I guess the amount of prey available is so substantial that it can support 10 birds in one location. This is not a conventional looking raptor. It's one of the most distinctive and iconic species in the Masai Mara and in some other parts of Africa as well. The secretary bird. Those long legs are very distinctive. This one's up in a tree, but they generally spend their time on the ground, like the ground hornbill. They walk around looking for prey. And I guess that's why it's got the long legs, so it can just see above the grass surrounding it. It feeds quite a lot on snakes as well as lizards, invertebrates. As I said, this one's up in a tree, and the reason for that is that they nest in trees, and this one is at its nest. So here's another shot of it on the nest. To the right there is a superb starling, which is about the same size as our starling. So to give you an idea of the size of the secretary bird. And here you can just see the head of a juvenile peeking out there. There's obviously a lot of vultures in the Masai Mara with so many mammals, big mammals around. I think most of them in March when I was there had probably moved on to Serengeti, where all the, well, not all, but the majority of the wildebeest and zebra had moved to. This one is the largest of the vultures, the lappet-faced vulture, sometimes called the king of the vultures in that part of the world. And its wingspan, it can be almost 3 meters, so it's a very large bird indeed. This is a ring-necked dove bathing. On to storks. This is Abdim's stork, sort of smallish one. And I observed at one occasion that they were moving around like this in a group, in a kind of formation. They're in feeding mode, so they're prodding in the grass, as you can see, disturbing potential prey. And I guess that there's an advantage to doing this as a group, because your neighbor might disturb one grasshopper, say, and it jumps over your way and you pick it up, and vice versa. So it was interesting. There's quite a lot more birds in this group than the ones you can just see in the image here. And if you look carefully, top right, you will see there's another bird there, and that's the common kestrel. There were 3 or 4 kestrels flying around where these storks were, taking advantage of the insects that were disturbed and took to the air. So beneficial for the kestrels as well as the storks. And this is the largest stork, the woolly-necked stork, and perhaps not as common as Abdim's. And another beautiful and iconic species of East Africa, the grey crowned crane. What a beautiful bird that is, and very elegant as well. This is one of the shrikes, the grey-backed shrike, or grey-backed fiscal shrike. Perhaps the commonest in the area where I was. And the other common species is the common fiscal. And of course, as you all know, shrikes are sometimes called the butcher bird, because when they catch their prey, they may impale it on a thorn, and cache it and eat it later. There are also various species of rollers to be seen. This is the iconic one of that part of the world, the lilac-breasted roller, which I believe is the national bird of Kenya. So when bird photographers go to East Africa or Southern Africa, they tend to come back with photos of the lilac-breasted roller. Such a colourful bird. And this is one of the starlings, Rupel's starling. And here we have a swallow, not, of course, our barn swallow. If you look particularly on the underside, you can see it's got black stripes on the white, and that's what it gets its name from. It's the striped swallow. Now, there are few human dwellings in the main part of the Masai Mara. So where do these birds nest? You can see it's gathering some mud. And I think the answer is that like swifts, common swifts in this country, before humans started building houses and things, they nested in trees. So here we see a striped swallow in a decaying branch of a tree where it was disappearing up in a sort of gap there, and with mud in its bill. So I think it's building a nest there. This is a widow bird, Jackson's widow bird. This is endemic to that part of East Africa. Like the pin-tailed wider that we saw earlier, it has a courtship display that involves flying up into the air and then sort of parachuting back down again. And here's another species of widow bird, the yellow-mantled widow bird. Now for plovers and other long-legged birds, this is a rather loose group, my own grouping, if you like, but let's start with plovers. And this is the crowned plover, a dainty, colourful bird with those pink legs and the pink base to the bill. And a brave bird, because if its young or its eggs are threatened, it will fly around, make intimidating flights, like our lapwing does, in fact. And if the predator persists in approaching the area where the juveniles or the nest is, it will try dive bombing them, thereby putting its own life at risk. Another plover, much smaller one, the three-banded plover. So two black bands and the white band in between there. And this one is the African wattled plover, a very colourful one with again with the yellow legs, yellow bill, and that little bit of pinkish red next to the yellow wattle. And this is the water thick-knee. So in Europe we have the stone curlew. That's a member of the thick-knee family, otherwise known as the Eurasian thick-knee. So this is a cousin of the stone curlew, and indeed the stone curlews sometimes, although rarely, found in the Masai Mara as a migrant. These birds, as the name suggests, like to hang out near water, and they're generally on riverbanks. Here we see two of them. They blend in quite well with that muddy coloured background and can be difficult to pick out sometimes. And they tend to be active primarily at night. This is Temminck's courser. And I said we'd get to weaver birds eventually. This is the village weaver. So this is the one that I mentioned was parasitized by Diederik cuckoo. I think you'd know this was a weaver even if you'd never seen a weaver bird, just by the action that it's involved in. It does what it says on the tin. They construct nests generally in acacias overhanging rivers, which is the case with this one. Here we have another shot. I read about some research recently that apparently demonstrates that their ability to weave is not a learned behavior, it's an innate behavior. So they're genetically programmed to be able to do that, which is pretty amazing, I think. Okay, let's move on to mammals. So yeah, it's the mammals I think that most people visit the Mara for. And there are something like almost 90 species of mammals there, I believe. And I'll start off by looking at some of the biggest ones: black rhino, elephant, hippo, and giraffe. This is a black rhino, and some of the animals in the Mara where you don't have huge numbers, and the ones that are valued more by conservationists because their status is threatened. Individuals are often named. So this one happens to be called Kuntai, K-U-N-T-A-I. And Masai Mara has a substantial population of black rhino. I don't know any precise figures, and they seem to vary a lot from year to year because of the potential threat of poaching, etc. But it sustains a natural population without any translocations of animals from other parts of the world, other parts of Africa. There are also large numbers of elephants. Again, I'm not sure about figures, but maybe 1,000 elephants in the Masai Mara. This is the African plains elephant, as the habitat would suggest. A little group of them here, going about their business. This is another way of viewing the wildlife, of course, hot air balloons. I'm glad to say I think this was the only one that came anywhere near to us during 10 days there, because it was March is a slack period. Most people visit Masai Mara in July, August, when you have the huge numbers of wildebeest and zebra back from the Serengeti. This time of the year, there aren't so many tourists around. But obviously, these elephants have got used to people in balloons. They didn't seem too perturbed by this balloon. But it's a huge thing, isn't it, relative to the size of the elephants. And here we have a small group of elephants crossing a river. Now, this elephant has found a puddle with some mud in it and is spraying itself with mud. I'm not sure why, because it wasn't particularly hot at the time, so I doubt it was to cool itself down, but it was obviously deriving some pleasure or benefit from doing this. Another of the biggest mammals is the hippopotamus. Of course, hippopotamus means horse of the river, and that's where it is usually during the day, in a pool or a river or a lake. This is early in the morning, so I guess this one just hasn't got around to re-entering the water. I think this is fairly well known or understood to be, in a sense, the most dangerous mammal in Africa, in that it kills more people than any other. It's not inherently aggressive, I don't think. Some people get killed if they're canoeing along and they're in an area where there are hippos. They may not realize that there are hippos there, and hippos might take offense or feel threatened in some way, I don't know. It can also happen on land. As I said, they're mainly nocturnal, so if you're walking at night, you might walk near a hippo not realizing it's there. And if you walk between the hippo and the water body from which it's come, it may feel threatened and may attack a human for that reason. Or if there's a female with a juvenile and you happen to walk in between the two, again, presumably without realizing it, she might attack you because she thinks she pose a threat to the juvenile. I once stayed in another part of Kenya, Lake Baringo, which has hippos, and I was staying in a hut on a campsite, a banda, and there were a couple of other bandas there, and somebody staying in the second banda was a Dutch PhD student doing some research there. And we shared a kitchen and toilet area and a communal dining table. And one evening we'd finished dinner and we were sitting at the table chatting, and 9 o'clock or whatever, it was dark. And I suddenly noticed this hippo behind about 5 or 6 yards away. I said, "Don't look now, but there's a hippo behind you." But she'd been there for several weeks or months already doing her research, so she was quite used to this kind of thing. And she told me an experience that had happened a few weeks earlier, where a professor from King's College, London, was there sitting in more or less the same place that she was in at the table. And a hippo, he was working on his laptop. A hippo came up behind him and sort of just almost peered over his shoulder. But if you stay calm and they don't feel threatened, you're okay. There's another hippo out during the day, early morning. As I said, they spend most of the day in the water, and they're a social animal. So these ones just seem to be having a nap together. But you do occasionally see what appears to be a confrontation between a couple of them. I don't know how serious this kind of thing is. And then the fourth big species, or at least tall species, is the Masai giraffe. With those long legs, they can run pretty fast, up to 60 kilometers per hour, I believe. One of the things I discovered preparing for this evening's presentation was that the collective noun for a group of giraffes is a tower of giraffes, which seems to me to be a very appropriate word for them. And there's another shot of the Masai giraffe. Small carnivores. On the left there we have mongoose, tree mongoose. There are different species of mongoose in the Masai Mara. This is the banded mongoose. You might be able to see some vertical bands on the rear half of the one that we can see on the left there. And we encountered this group of mongoose in confrontation with this snake. Now, I'm not an expert on East African snakes, but I think this might be a boom slang. Anyway, we watched with interest to see what was going to happen, but unfortunately, another vehicle came along and didn't realize we were stopped there because these animals were there, didn't see them, drove nearer and just scared them off. So there was no clear winner in the confrontation. This is a nocturnal animal, as you might guess from the size of the ears. At least it's predominantly nocturnal. It's the bat-eared fox. And previously I'd only seen one bat-eared fox, and that was in Namibia when I've been able to go out on an early evening game drive. But there was a group of them not far from the camp where I was staying that would be out, 5 o'clock in the evening while it was still quite light. So it's good to see them out in the open. And this is the jackal, which has two different names, sometimes called the black-backed jackal, and another name for it though is the silver-backed jackal. So you can see why it has two different names there. Neither name quite captures that mixture of the two colours. So I think they tend to move around in small groups, although this one's on its own, and they will try and access carrion that may be left or being eaten by larger predators, or they may catch prey of their own, like game birds, for example. I've classified this as a small carnivore, but it's quite a big small carnivore, the spotted hyena. They hunt in groups. They have very, very powerful jaws, and they may feed on carrion. So they may steal food sometimes off cheetahs, for example, or leopards. Because even if you're a leopard and you're a big, powerful animal, faced with a group of these guys, you probably decide to back off if they're persistent. They can polish off prey very quickly. If they caught or got hold of a Thompson's gazelle, for example, and we'll look at what they look like later. Apparently, according to my guidebook, they can finish a small Thompson's gazelle in less than 5 minutes. And when I say finish it, they eat all of it, including the bones. They crunch through the bones. They've got a high level of acidity in the intestinal system that can break down all these materials. But here, a slightly different image. There was a den hyena den that was not too far from where I was staying, and these cubs, which I think look pretty young, don't look as though they've been around all that long. Let's look at some of the herbivores now. And of course, the reason that most of the area in the Masai Mara is grassland is that there are so many herbivores there, grazing and browsing, and it's difficult for trees to get established there. The warthog is perhaps the strangest looking of them. And you'll see it's got a bird on its back there, a red-billed oxpecker. And the warthog has some small tusks. I don't know whether you can just see them in the photo there. So that can be potentially dangerous if a predator goes after it. You've got to be careful if you're a predator. But it does get taken by big cats occasionally. This is the larger of the two gazelles, Grant's gazelle. And one of the distinguishing features is the fact it doesn't have a black stripe along its side. Perhaps the main distinguishing feature, because the second gazelle does have that. If you look at the horns, they're a bit curved, but sort of a long straight part and then just a curve at the end. And this is the Thompson's gazelle with the black stripe, smaller gazelle, favorite prey of cheetahs. So we've all seen film of cheetahs chasing their prey. Usually in those videos and bits of film we see, it's a Thompson's gazelle that they're after. But a martial eagle, I believe, could take one of these as well. And here's a young Thompson gazelle. And they're assembled in groups. You know, I guess more eyes means greater safety, more looking out for predators. Here they've got into line because they're approaching a small river, contemplating whether to cross the river or not. And there are, of course, risks in crossing river, and on this occasion they decided it was not the right time to do so, and ran away. That being the main danger, Nile crocodiles waiting for animals like that to come across and provide some tasty food. And this is the impala, so a bit like a Grant's gazelle that we saw earlier, but easily distinguished by those very curvy horns that it's got. And here are three of them, all, I think it's evident, on alert, looking in the same direction, and with good reason. There's a pride of lions approaching. Actually, although they're on alert because of the lions, I think the more serious predator for them is perhaps the leopard. These are a favorite prey of the leopard. And here's one decided it's time to hoof it. One evening we were returning to camp and encountered a group of male impalas, and they were pairing off and doing what we see red deer do in the rut, you know, confronting each other like this. And I think you can, as with red deer, you can get serious injuries taking place. Here you see an antler sticking out of the neck of this impala, which makes me wonder whether it ought to be called the impaler. Excuse that. Onto some of the bigger herbivores. Coke's hartebeest, topee, wildebeest, and the Fassa waterbuck. This is the hartebeest. I think it's a strange looking animal. Looks like it's been designed by a committee. Here's another shot. Compared to most of the mammal species in this part of the Masai Mara, I found that the hartebeests tend to be a bit shyer. Most of the mammals are really habituated to vehicles and will allow a vehicle to drive very close without batting an eyelid. But these ones tend to be a bit more nervous in my experience. And this is the topi, a black and tan colouring. This one's having a scratch behind the ear, I think. There's another shot of a topi. And here's the wildebeest. As I said, most of them have migrated to the Serengeti, are in the Serengeti at this time of the year. But there's a substantial number of wildebeest remain in Kenya, and there's another wildebeest migration entirely within that part of Kenya. So maybe this wildebeest is linked to that, I don't know. And this is the female Defasa waterbuck, and that's the male. Despite the name waterbuck, well, the name waterbuck indicates that they are a wetland animal, but despite that, they can also be found in grassland areas. They like grasslands, and they're fine there so long as there's plenty of water for them to drink, plenty of fresh water. And I'm going to finish on the cats. And Masai Mara is famous for the 3 big African cats, the lion, the leopard, and the cheetah. But if you're visiting the Masai Mara, you're probably less likely to see one of these smaller cats. There's the SERVAL and the caracal. In fact, you'd probably be extremely lucky to see a caracal. I didn't see any, but I was quite lucky to see a SERVAL. It's not that they're rare necessarily, far from it, but their small size means that they can be in that long grass and you just wouldn't know that they're there. I think it's a bit bigger than a domestic cat, a bit longer, slimmer than a domestic cat. And they're very good at leaping into the air and pouncing on birds, as is the caracal. But this one, I mean, they're generally shy and don't show themselves. This one's got a bit used to humans, I think, being not so far from camp. And we saw it on a couple of occasions. And you are guaranteed to see lions, I think, in the Masai Mara. I can't say exactly how many there are, but I read that there's something like 1,000 lions in the area. And most lions belong to a pride. And I saw a figure suggesting there were 18 prides in the Masai Mara. Obviously, that's going to be dynamic and vary from year to year, but it gives you an idea. So here we see a group of lions, a pride of lions, and they tend to be led by a small number of females. This pride there's 2 adult females there, and there'll be juveniles of various ages. And here you can see the same 2 females and I think 10 juveniles following in their footsteps. And this is another pride with 4 lionesses and several juveniles. This is the pride that was spooking those 3 antelope that we looked at earlier, the impalas. The cubs can be very cute. It's good to be able to watch them in action. They're inquisitive, of course, like virtually all young animals are, exploring their environment. This one's having a tug at a bit of vegetation, trying to pull it out of the ground. And they like playing with their peers, as these ones are. This one seems to be pushing its luck a bit, so I suppose they're learning social skills and what's acceptable and what isn't. And you play with your siblings from your own age and maybe older siblings, or they may not be your siblings, and may belong to other females in the pride, and apparently whispering in the ear of mother. No, I don't think it's whispering actually. So it's nice to see prides of lions just chilling out like that. As they get older, they're learning hunting skills, of course, and they have to learn to look out for potential prey and also look out for potential threats, as these three are doing. Here in this pride, we see the juveniles paying close attention to whatever it is that the female on the right is looking at. And then male lions, when they reach the age of 2 or 3, have to leave the pride and go off and do their own thing. So you might not realize it, but this is a male. Looks a bit like a female to me, but he hasn't yet developed his mane. So you can see signs of it sort of under his chin on the neck there. It's developing. An older male with a fully developed mane. And you can see that this one has had an injury of some sort, perhaps in a fight with another male lion. You see this male's got a scratch down his nose, so he's had a bit of hassle at some point. Lions will sprint on trees, as this one is doing, to leave a chemical message of their presence, either for the benefit of other lions that might be coming into the area, male lions, or maybe for the benefit of females, I don't know, but lots of information can be passed on by sprinting like that. And here are 2 males. Older males usually associate with 1 or 2 other males rather than being on their own like that young one we saw earlier. So two old mature males there having a sleep. And reproduction, of course, is an important part of lion behavior. A male and a female lion will pair off for a week or so for the specific purpose of mating, and will spend that whole week involved in mating and resting, rather than hunting and feeding, or so I gather from my Mammals guide. And they're quite prolific in the mating, so in the space of an hour they might mate 2 or 3 times. So if you want to photograph them in action, that's good, because if you just missed it once, you don't necessarily have to wait long before they'll mate again. But once they do, you've got to be quick, because it only lasts for 10 or 15 seconds. I think I mentioned earlier that one of the main prey of lions is zebras. And these zebras can sense that there is a lion around, they're on edge. And you can perhaps see that fawn blob in the foreground, that's a lioness waiting to pounce. And there's probably several lionesses in the area. It's probably a coordinated bit of action, because they tend to hunt in groups. And this one explodes out into the open, and the zebra panic, and the wildebeest. I didn't see this one catch anything, but about 20 minutes later we came across a lioness not far away feeding on a zebra. And if any of you are squeamish about this kind of thing, close your eyes, because you might not want to see the next slide. So here's the lioness that I mentioned, and you can see it's a zebra that she's got there. So although most lion hunting is done during the night, there is nevertheless some done during the day as well. Onto the leopards. And leopards are hunting at night primarily. And this one has caught an impala. You can see the skull, and if you look below the branch where the skull is, you can see the 2 horns sticking out below. So he's just finishing off an impala that he's caught during the night. And generally, leopards do take their prey up into trees. because if they stayed on the ground and hyenas or lions got whiff of their prey and came over, they would probably have it stolen off them. So the safe thing to do is to get up into a tree and consume your prey up there. And I think it enjoyed this one, licking its lips there. And we watched this animal finishing off the impala for quite a long time, and it was extremely meticulous about eating every little last scrap of meat that there was to be had. And then when they finish their prey, they tend to come down the tree and then leap down into the grass and disappear off somewhere. I had never seen a leopard in Africa before this trip, despite being in national parks in Namibia and Tanzania and Kenya. But on this trip, I saw 5 leopards in 10 or 11 days. This is a female leopard. I mentioned earlier that some of these animals of more conservation concern that aren't so common tend to have their own names assigned to them. That last one, the male, was called the lookout male. Lookout is a particular area of the Masai Mara, and this female is called Bahati, and she's was quite an old female at the time. And we were in the jeep, and we just parked ourselves, anticipating the direction that she was going to be coming in. And as I said, most of the animals there just completely ignore the vehicles. So she came walking along right next to our vehicle on the side that I was on, and I could have literally put my arm out and stroked her, but of course that wouldn't be a very sensible thing to do. But that's how close these animals can come. And on my first day on this trip, when we encountered a pride of lions walking towards the vehicle, I did feel kind of a bit spooked, because they appear to be looking straight at you some of the time, and yet somehow they see through you. You know, they don't see you as a potential prey. But I was a bit concerned on the first day, even though I've been in that kind of situation before. And now I'm going to move on to the last of the big 3 cats and finish with cheetahs. This is a young male, and when we saw him, he just sort of appeared from nowhere, and the guide didn't know anything about him. We took lots of photographs of him. He decided to lie down on this little track, as you can see here. And he was able to look up and down the track for prey or whatever, without any grass getting in the way. And here, well, he's either yawning or laughing to himself. I think it's a yawn. But we didn't know anything about him, and we photographed him, and then we parted company with him. And about half an hour later, we were driving along the track, and another vehicle came from the opposite direction, and it just happened to be the main cheetah researcher in the Masai Mara, who has developed a way of identifying all individual cheetahs, looking at the markings on their front legs from foot to shoulder, and on their back legs from foot to pelvis, and on the rings and dots, spots on the tail. And she keeps photographs of each animal, each individual, laminated in a folder. So she got out her folder and compared all her photos with the ones we had taken, and was eventually able to identify this as a young male called Mugi. And she said that he hadn't been reported seen in the area for 3 months. So he just come back from somewhere, but we don't know where. The young males often move around or sometimes move around in groups, as in this case. And if they're hunting in a group, as they do, means they can hunt bigger prey than if they're hunting as individuals. I think this is the same group, and one of them is sprinting. It might even be the same tree that lion was sprinting on. And you can see the one on the left is sort of sniffing at the tree, presumably picking up lots of information about other animals that have been there. Cheetahs hunt almost entirely during the day and rely primarily on their eyesight for hunting. And so it helps to have a lookout position. Unfortunately, there are various ones dotted around it all over the place in the form of termite mounds. So it's quite common to see a cheetah like this on top of a termite mound, scanning around looking for potential prey. And here's another shot of the same. This is a female cheetah called Imani. This is one of the first photos I took of her when we encountered her. And I didn't know at that point that she was a mother, because she had a few cubs hidden in the grass, which then came out into the open. So she had 4 cubs on the first day we saw her. I think cheetah cubs have got to be the cutest of the cat cubs. And we saw her again after that, but here we could only see 3 cubs. And here, within 2 days, she was down to 3 cubs. And I heard about 3 months later, when I was back in this country, that only 1 of her cubs had lasted that long. So quite a high mortality rate. I can hazard a guess as to why that might be later. And then that's not specific to cheetah either. Young lions only have a 25% survival rate up to the age of 2. So by the age of 2, only 1 of 4 will be remaining. And I'll finish with this shot of Imani and 3 cubs. There's 1 hidden behind the grass on the left. And that's it. So thank you.